Tonight's menu featured beef tacos and pasta. A change from the usual, wouldn't you agree? It seems like frozen meals have become a bit too frequent in our household. I can't help but feel it's a bit unfair, especially after a long day's work. But I understand it's tough for you, especially with your due date approaching. You're right, I haven't been much help around here. It's been difficult managing things lately, especially with your pregnancy advancing. We've resorted to quicker meal options more than I'd like. I wish I could do more to share the load, not just in preparing meals, but with the household duties as well. I was hoping to avoid further strain, so I shifted the conversation to something else, asking if you could retrieve the mail for me. I didn't mean to make you feel worse about the meal situation. As I made my way to the door, a sudden click signal let it had been locked from the inside. Confused and a bit alarmed, I found myself locked out, without my phone, in the cold. Just when I was starting to panic, a kind stranger appeared. After hearing my story, he offered assistance. Reflecting on our life together, I remember the joy we shared. We've been married for 2 years, just the two of us, managing on a modest income but happy in our simple lifestyle. Our happiness doubled when we welcomed our baby into the world last month. Coming home with deli food tonight was a small gesture of care, especially considering how morning sickness has been more challenging for me than we anticipated. Pregnancy has been a journey of new experiences and challenges, far more intense than I'd heard from friends. Simple tasks have become daunting, yet your support has been unwavering, making me feel fortunate compared to some stories I've heard. Your understanding and assistance have been my strength through this unique time in our lives, reminding me of the bond we share and the resilience we have as a team. Tomorrow marks a special milestone, my in-laws' 27th wedding anniversary. Plans have been made to celebrate at their home, but I find myself in a bit of a predicament. The thought of enduring a 5-hour drive just doesn't sit well with me at the moment. My body has been through a lot lately, and I gently expressed my desire to possibly sit this one out. My husband reminded me of my consistent presence at family gatherings in the past, suggesting that attending his parents' significant celebration should be no different. I've always held his parents in high regard. They've been nothing but supportive and kind to us. From celebrating our pregnancy to assisting with our wedding expenses, their generosity knows no bounds. However, the severity of my morning sickness has made the idea of participating in their 50th anniversary gathering seem nearly impossible. Though my husband is aware of my discomfort, the physical experience of morning sickness is something he can't fully grasp. He seems insistent on my attendance, perhaps not fully understanding the toll it takes on me. Suggesting a visit on another day seemed like a reasonable compromise to me, hoping his mother would understand given the circumstances. Yet, the expectation to attend, compounded by the fact that my husband had already assured them of our presence, left me feeling cornered. He even advised me to downplay my sickness, which, while I understand his position, felt a bit insensitive to my current struggle. The thought of the long drive there and back, coupled with the potential stress, didn't bode well for my pregnancy. Nevertheless, wanting to avoid further tension, I agreed to go, armed with medication to mitigate the nausea. The morning of the trip, as anticipated, was rough, but the medication offered some relief. I braced myself for the day ahead, hopeful that I could make it through for the sake of family unity. As we neared their home, the worsening road conditions did no favors for my nausea. The extended travel time due to weekend traffic only added to my discomfort. Upon arrival, I gathered myself as best I could before face everyone. To my surprise, my mother-in-law immediately expressed her understanding of my condition. She reassured me that it would have been perfectly acceptable for my husband to attend on his own, given my health. Her empathy and understanding, likely rooted in her own experiences, made me question the necessity of my presence. In that moment, I felt a blend of relief and slight frustration, wishing this understanding had been communicated earlier. Nonetheless, her concern and the warm welcome somewhat eased the discomfort of the journey, reminding me of the importance of family and the shared compassion that often goes unspoken. Having already made the journey, expressing my grievances to my husband at that point seemed futile. After all, the day was meant to celebrate his parents' 50th anniversary, not to highlight my discomfort, despite my best efforts to blend into the background. Maintaining composure throughout the day was both physically and mentally draining. By the evening, my exhaustion was palpable. Yet I refrained from resting in the car to avoid seeming inattentive to my husband, who was driving. His observation of my apparent disinterest struck a chord. I had not intended to come across as uninterested. Fatigue had simply taken its toll. My mother-in-law's considerate acknowledgement of our late departure only underscored my wish for more empathy from my husband regarding my condition. Navigating the day with morning sickness and without complaint, I had hoped for a simple inquiry into my well-being during our drive home, a gesture that would have meant a great deal. Instead, my efforts seemed overlooked, my feelings unacknowledged. Raising any issue felt like it would only escalate tensions, especially when the focus seemed to be solely on how I appeared to others rather than my well-being. Following what felt like a lecture from him, silence enveloped our journey back. The tension was palpable, making the hours stretch longer. We arrived home after 9 p.m., both undoubtedly weary from the day's events. Drained, I collapsed onto the couch, barely managing to keep my eyes open. Just as I was contemplating the energy to change for bed, my husband remarked on the absence of beer in the fridge, implying it was my responsibility to restock. His request for me to go out and purchase more at that late hour, after a day riddled with nausea and fatigue, felt almost cruel. This recent behavior painted a stark contrast to the care and consideration he had shown at the beginning of our marriage. The day's events and his ensuing demands left me feeling not only physically drained, but emotionally neglected, pondering the shift in his attentiveness and compassion towards me. I never expected things to reach this point. His mood had been off in the car, and I sensed that any refusal on my part would only escalate his irritation. But truly, I was at my breaking point. The idea of trekking to the convenience store to fetch beer at such a late hour, after a day marred by morning sickness, seemed absurd. Despite expressing my exhaustion and the toll the day had taken on me multiple times, he dismissed my concerns as trivial, insisting on having his beer before he finished his bath, or else he'd be infuriated. The stern look he gave me, full of expectation, left no room for negotiation. Once he retreated to the bathroom, a wave of frustration overwhelmed me, leading to a moment of physical venting on the couch. Resigned to the idea that this would be my final task of the night, I made a quick trip to the store, hoping to avoid any further conflict. Upon returning, I managed to get the beers in the fridge and made my way to bed before he emerged from his bath. The exhaustion was so profound that I fell asleep instantly, almost collapsing into unconsciousness from the sheer fatigue. Surprisingly, I found a moment of pride in my ability to push through the day's demands. The next morning, while he slept in, I awoke feeling slightly better than the day before, though morning sickness still lingered. Seizing a moment of relative wellness, I tackled most of the household chores, reflecting on how much heavier each task felt as my pregnancy progressed. The supportive partner I once knew seemed to have vanished, replaced by someone who seemed more critical than caring. Despite my efforts to keep up with everything and avoid his complaints, the emotional and physical toll was undeniable. Now, in the final month of my pregnancy, the anticipation of meeting our baby brings a glimmer of hope and excitement, offering a reprieve from the challenges I've faced. This journey has been anything but easy, yet the thought of soon holding our child fills me with a sense of purpose and joy, overshadowing the difficult days behind me. Upon his late return home, conversation turned to the mundane. Dinner plans. Suggesting beef tacos and pasta, I tried to maintain a sense of normalcy, despite everything, focusing on the future and the arrival of our baby, a beacon of hope amidst the trials. Recently, I resorted to serving frozen meals I'd picked up from Costco, only to be met with dismay. Juggling pregnancy and household chores has maxed out my capacity, leaving me little room for cooking from scratch. I've silently wished for my husband to lend a hand with the chores, so I might allocate some energy towards preparing fresher meals. His frustration over chores, despite my limited cooking efforts, has only added to my stress. It's disheartening to see him, a soon-to-be father, show little willingness to share the household responsibilities, leading me to question our future dynamics. Driven to my limits, I finally voiced my concerns, highlighting the impracticality of managing everything solo and the unfairness of his expectations, especially given my nearing due date. His usual pastimes, drinking and golf, mean he's rarely home to assist. My plea was for understanding and support, not confrontation. Surprisingly, instead of the anticipated backlash, he disengaged, busying himself with his phone, a reaction that left me puzzled but relieved that an argument was averted. That evening, as before, dinner was a reheated affair, consumed late due to his delayed return. Post-dinner, well into the night, he requested I check the mailbox, an odd, seemingly trivial task that I obliged, hoping to avoid any discord. The mailbox, however, was empty, a discovery made all the more chilling by the winter's cold and my inadequate attire. Upon attempting to re-enter our home, I found the door inexplicably locked from the inside. My calls for entry were met with silence, leading me to fear the worst. That this act was a punitive response to earlier tensions or perhaps a misguided jest gone too far. Stranded in the freezing night, dressed only in pajamas, the situation became dire. The cold was relentless, mirroring the chill of our strained relationship. Locked out and alone, I faced the harsh reality of our communication breakdown, pondering the sustainability of our marriage under such conditions. Intending only a brief trip to the mailbox, I was woefully underprepared for the cold night, dressed too lightly for the freezing temperatures. The biting cold had my face and hands stinging, my body trembling uncontrollably as I struggled to maintain warmth. Panic began to set in as my thoughts muddled. I repeatedly rang the doorbell and called out, hoping for my husband to open the door. Yet there was no answer. His silence left me wondering if this was a harsh retaliation for the convenience meals I'd been relying on. As time painfully stretched on without any sign of him, my energy waned, and the cold seemed to penetrate deeper. It was during this moment of despair that I heard someone approaching. To my surprise, it was a bartender from a nearby establishment, someone I hadn't met due to his nocturnal schedule. His timely appearance felt almost serendipitous as he offered his coat, a kind gesture from a stranger that brought a glimmer of hope. Despite the unusual circumstances, I found myself sharing the ordeal with him, driven by a mix of desperation and the need for human kindness. Gratefully accepting his offer to use his phone, I contacted my in-laws, arranging for a place to stay the night. The warmth of the hotel room was a stark contrast to the cold I had endured, and I quickly fell into an exhausted sleep. The next morning brought a bewildering scene at my home. My in-laws were waiting, their presence a result of my late-night call. But nothing prepared me for the sight of my husband, outside and underdressed in the still, chilly morning air, receiving disapproving looks from his parents. It was a shocking twist I hadn't anticipated. Their expressions and the situation hinted at a swift and unconventional form of discipline, instigated by my in-laws. The revelation that they had taken action upon hearing of my predicament from the bartender, whose phone I had borrowed to make the crucial call, was unexpected. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. The very act meant to chastise my husband for his lack of consideration had turned the tables, leaving him in a vulnerable position. This turn of events, orchestrated by my in-laws, underscored the gravity of the situation and their willingness to intervene. It was a stark reminder of the support system I had, albeit one that operated in unexpected ways. The ordeal, while harrowing, ultimately revealed the lengths to which my family would go to address injustices within our household dynamics. After the chilling incident that left me seeking refuge outside my own home, I reached out to my mother-in-law, pouring out not just the evening's events but also voicing a suspicion that had been growing within me. This suspicion wasn't my own, but was planted by a bartender, a stranger who had become an unexpected ally in the cold night. He had mentioned seeing my husband around town with a younger woman, a sighting that struck a chord given his late-night habits. Taking this information to heart, I shared my fears with my mother-in-law, who acted swiftly. With access to our home through a spare key, she and my father-in-law confronted my husband early the next morning. Their investigation into his phone confirmed the worst, clear evidence of an affair. The revelation shattered any remaining empathy I might have held for him, especially considering his attempt to leave me out in the cold. The irony of my husband, now the one shivering outside, didn't escape me. His infidelity, confirmed by the in-laws, turned my pity into resolve. Before this, I had never suspected him of being unfaithful. Our marriage, once filled with shared moments and trust, seemed a distant memory, especially now, as I faced pregnancy largely alone. Confronting him, I couldn't help but remark sarcastically about seeking warmth from his affair partner, noting his visibly distressed state. His suffering from the cold, however long it lasted, was a mere fraction of the betrayal I felt. And as he struggled for words, likely numbed by the cold, I declared my decision to divorce, unmoved by his misery. His reaction to the mention of divorce, pallor still from the cold, hinted at his fears, perhaps of the divorce itself or the financial implications. But at that moment, any concern for his well-being vanished, replaced by a determination to protect my interests and those of our unborn child. I made it clear that I intended to pursue not only a divorce, but also legal action for emotional damage, undeterred by his pleas for discussion. My father-in-law's stern intervention left my husband without recourse, emphasizing the gravity of his actions and their consequences. His desire to return to the warmth of our home was overshadowed by the looming threat of what lay ahead. This moment, although fraught with disappointment and betrayal, marked a turning point for me, as I resolved to move forward from the pain inflicted by his selfish actions, fortified by the support of my in-laws. With the resolution to turn a new chapter in my life, I moved back to my parents' home, leaving my estranged husband in the care of his parents. Observing his frail state did little to stir my sympathy, given his actions towards me. My parents welcomed me with open arms, offering their support and a place to raise my child, for which I was immensely thankful. My focus shifted entirely towards preparing for childbirth, requesting my in-laws to postpone any discussions about my husband until after the baby's arrival. 4 weeks after settling in at my parents' house, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy, his cries upon entering the world moving me to tears and marking my official journey into motherhood. Over the next 5 months, I immersed myself in caring for my son, gradually adapting to our new life together. Eventually, I invited my in-laws to meet their grandson, under the agreement that my husband would not accompany them. Their joy upon holding him was evident, yet it was tinged with a sadness for what could have been a more joyous family milestone. During their visit, we also tackled the pending issue of alimony and child support. With their assistance, the entire affair involving my husband was thoroughly investigated, leading to a legal settlement. He arranged a lump sum payment for alimony through a loan, but struggled to manage the substantial child support obligation. Remarkably, my in-laws intervened to ensure the financial stability of their grandson, agreeing to a monthly reimbursement plan with my husband. The aftermath of these events left my husband financially strained, dedicating a significant portion of his income to repay his parents, with barely enough left for his own sustenance. The revelation of his marital status led to the dissolution of his relationship with the other woman, further isolating him. Despite the harsh consequences he faced, they were a direct result of his actions, leaving me with a sense of poetic justice. Now, residing with my parents, I am embracing the challenges and joys of single motherhood. The support from my family has been invaluable, lightening the load and enhancing the experience. As I look towards the future, I plan to re-enter the workforce once my son begins elementary school. Maintaining a connection with my in-laws, we plan periodic visits, preserving the familial bond for my son's sake. While my husband's choices led to his downfall, they inadvertently paved the way for a fresh start for me and my child. With a new beginning at hand, I am determined to build a happy and fulfilling life, cherishing the precious moments with my son and leaning on the strength and support of my loved ones.